he was leaving town forever, until it changed his entire life.
If you had told me that finding a stranger asleep in my own car would be the best thing that ever happened to me, I would have laughed in your face. That night, I almost called the police. I almost drove away and forgot the whole thing ever happened. Instead, I opened the door and said 3 words that changed my entire life. Get in. Now. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know she was running for her life. All I knew was that nothing about that parking lot felt right anymore, and somehow, neither did I. Stay with me. This one's going to hurt a little before it heals. My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 34 years old, and by most measures, I have everything a man is supposed to want. A corner office on the 40th floor. A company with my name stitched into the letterhead. A black car with leather seats that still smelled new, even after 2 years. What I didn't have was anyone waiting for me at home. I built Cold Dynamics from nothing, a garage, a laptop, and a stubborn refusal to fail, into a firm that now employed almost 300 people. Somewhere along the way, I traded weekends for spreadsheets and relationships for deadlines. I told myself it was temporary. That once the company stabilized, I'd slow down, find someone, build a life outside these glass walls. 5 years later, I was still telling myself the same lie. That night had been one of the long ones. A funding call that ran past 10. An investor who wanted to renegotiate terms we'd already agreed on twice. By the time I stepped out of the building, the city had gone quiet in that particular way it does after midnight, streetlights humming, the occasional taxi sliding past, everyone else already home. I just wanted to get to my car, drive home, make coffee I probably didn't need, and try to forget the outside world for a few hours. The parking garage was nearly empty. My footsteps echoed off the concrete in a way that usually didn't bother me. That night, for reasons I couldn't explain, it did. I found myself walking a little faster, glancing over my shoulder once, twice, telling myself I was just tired. Then I reached my car, and something was wrong before I even understood what it was. The passenger door was open. Not wide, just a few inches, enough for the interior light to be glowing faintly against the dark. I stopped walking. I always locked that door. I was the kind of person who checked twice, out of habit more than paranoia. Seeing it open like that, in an empty garage, at midnight, sent a cold current straight through my chest. My eyes swept the garage. Concrete pillars. Empty spaces. A flickering light 2 rows over. No one. I told myself it was nothing. A malfunction. A mistake from the valet earlier that day. But I didn't believe it, and some old, animal part of my brain wasn't about to let me walk away without checking. I moved toward the car slowly, the way you approach something when part of you doesn't want to know the answer. I reached the door, took a breath, and looked inside. For a moment, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. There was a woman in my back seat. She was curled up against the door, knees pulled to her chest, dark hair falling across her face. She was asleep, or trying to be. Even in the dim garage light, I could see she was beautiful in a way that felt almost out of place in that moment, like something borrowed from another kind of night entirely. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, one hand still on the door, trying to make sense of a stranger sleeping in the back of my car like it was the most natural thing in the world. Who was she? How had she gotten in? And out of every car in that garage, why mine? I should have called security right then. Any reasonable person would have. Instead, I found myself reaching for the handle, some instinct pulling me forward before my mind had caught up. "Hey," I said quietly, easing the door open the rest of the way. Her eyes flew open. For half a second, she didn't seem to know where she was. Then her whole body went rigid, and her eyes, wide, glassy, terrified, locked onto mine. "Please," she said, voice cracking, hands coming up like she was bracing for a blow. "Please don't hurt me. I stepped back immediately, hands raised, putting as much distance between us as the narrow space allowed. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, the way you'd talk to someone standing too close to a ledge. "I just want to know what you're doing in my car." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the garage the way mine had a minute earlier, checking every shadow, every corner, like she expected something to come out of the dark. "Is someone out there?" I asked. "Are you being followed?" Her breath caught. That was all the answer I needed. "My name is Claire," she finally said, barely above a whisper. I had nowhere else to go. Up close, I could see how young she looked, 26, maybe 27, and how exhausted. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day. The kind that settles into your bones after weeks of not sleeping properly, of flinching at every sound. She was clutching a small handbag against her chest like it was the only thing left that belonged to her. I could have called the police right there. I could have told her to get out and walked away, pretended the whole thing never happened. It would have been the smart thing to do. The safe thing. Instead, I noticed the tears sitting in her eyes, threatening to fall, and something in me refused to walk away. "Are you in danger?" I asked. She hesitated so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, finally, she nodded. "My ex," she said. "He's been looking for me." "Why?" Her jaw tightened, like the question cost her something to answer. "Because I finally left him." The words came out slowly at first, then faster, like she'd been holding them in for so long that once the dam cracked, everything rushed out at once. She told me about a relationship that hadn't started as anything frightening, just a man who wanted to know where she was, who she was with, why she was late. Small things, at first. The kind of things you convince yourself are just love, just care, just someone who wants to keep you close. Until they weren't small anymore. Until, just checking in became 5 missed calls turning into 15. Until, "I just worry about you," became accusations, and accusations became rules, and rules became a life that had quietly shrunk down to the size of an apartment she wasn't supposed to leave without telling him first. Tonight, she said, she had finally found the courage to walk out the door. "I didn't even pack anything," she said, looking down at the handbag in her lap. "I just left. I didn't think, I just ran." He'd followed her. Through 2 streets, past a closed pharmacy, around a corner where she'd lost him for a few precious seconds. She'd ducked into the parking garage because it was dark and she didn't know where else to go. She saw my car, unlocked, and climbed in without thinking, without a plan beyond simply not being outside anymore. "I know it was wrong," she said, finally looking up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed but steady now, like she'd decided that whatever happened next, she wasn't going to look away from it. "I know I shouldn't have gotten into a stranger's car. I just needed somewhere he wouldn't think to look." I studied her for a long moment. The fear in her voice. The way her hands wouldn't quite stop shaking, even now. Nothing about this was convenient, or safe, or anything close to what my carefully organized life was supposed to look like. That I stared at the number on my phone screen for 3 full rings before I answered. I told myself I wasn't nervous. I was 34 years old, I ran a company with 300 employees, I had sat across from investors who could end my career with 1 phone call and never blinked. And yet my hand actually hesitated over the screen, like answering might change something I wasn't ready to change. I answered anyway. "Hi," Claire said. Just that. 1 word, and something in my chest loosened that I hadn't realized was tight. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Are you safe?" "I'm safe," she said. "I'm at my sister's. He hasn't found me here." There was a pause after that, not an awkward one, but the kind of silence 2 people share when neither wants to be the one to end the call. "Would you like to have coffee?" she finally asked. I laughed before I could stop myself. "Are you asking me out?" "Maybe," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, the first hint of the woman underneath all that fear from the night before. That coffee turned into 3 hours. We met at the same cafe, this time in daylight, and it felt like an entirely different place, sunlight through the windows instead of rain, the smell of fresh pastries instead of midnight desperation. Claire looked different too. Still tired, still careful in the way she watched the door, but lighter somehow, like she'd let herself breathe for the first time in months. We talked about everything and nothing. She told me about growing up in a small town 2 hours from the city, about a father who taught her to develop film in a makeshift darkroom before digital cameras made the whole process obsolete. She still had his old camera, she said. She hadn't touched it in over a year. Why not? I asked. She turned her cup slowly on the table, not quite meeting my eyes. Because he didn't like it when I took pictures of anything but him. Said I was wasting time on a hobby that would never go anywhere. I felt something tighten in my jaw, a flash of anger at a man I'd never met, directed at things I was only beginning to understand. I didn't say anything about it. I just asked her what she used to photograph, before. Strangers, mostly, she said, and for the first time that day, her whole face lit up. People on trains. Old couples on park benches. Anyone who looked like they had a story worth telling. You should start again. Maybe, she said again, the same word from the phone call, and I was starting to understand it meant something closer to yes than she was ready to admit out loud. She asked about me too, and I found myself telling her things I usually kept locked away behind quarterly earnings reports and investor decks. About the small design studio I'd dreamed of opening years ago, before Cold Dynamics existed, before spreadsheets replaced sketchbooks. About how I'd let the dream quietly die somewhere along the way because building something safe and profitable felt easier than building something I actually loved. You shouldn't give up on something just because you're scared, she told me. Easy for you to say. No, she said, quieter now. It's not. I'm scared too. Every single day. We sat with that for a moment, two people who had built entire lives around the things they were too afraid to want. That was the beginning of something neither of us named out loud, not yet. We started meeting every weekend. Sometimes we walked through the city with no destination in mind. Sometimes we sat in that same corner booth until the night shift waitress started giving us knowing looks. Sometimes we just sat in my car, engine off, talking for hours about nothing important, because it turned out we simply didn't want to stop talking to each other. For the first time in years, I found myself checking the clock at work not because a deadline was approaching, but because I was counting down to seeing her again. Claire was rebuilding, slowly. She found a small apartment 2 blocks from her sister's place, nothing fancy, but hers, with a lock on the door that only she had the key to. She went back to work at a bookstore she'd worked at years earlier, before her ex had convinced her that staying home was safer, easier, better for both of them. She started sleeping through full nights again, she told me, though she still checked the locks twice before bed. I never tried to rush any of it. I'd learned enough by then to understand that healing wasn't something you could hurry along, no matter how much you cared about the person doing the healing. So I stayed beside her. Not pulling her forward. Just there, the way I'd been there that first night in the parking garage, when staying was the only thing I had to offer. It wasn't until nearly 2 months later that the shadow from her old life caught up with us again. It was a Thursday evening. Claire had just closed the bookstore and was walking to her car when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she hadn't seen in weeks. I found out about it that night, sitting across from her at her small kitchen table, watching her hands shake around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. I know you're seeing someone. Tell him to watch his back. For words that undid 2 months of careful, hard-won peace in an instant. He's not supposed to have this number, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I changed it. I did everything right. I took the phone from her hands and read the message twice, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest, not fear, exactly. Something closer to resolve. He's trying to scare you, I said. That's all this is. It's working, she admitted. I reached across the table and took her hand, the way I had that first rainy night, when words weren't enough and staying was the only language that mattered. You're not alone in this anymore, I told her. Whatever happens next, we handle it together. She looked up at me, eyes glassy but steady, the same steadiness I'd seen in that garage the night we met, a woman who had been afraid, and terrified, and still somehow found the courage to keep choosing herself. Together, she repeated, like she was testing whether the word could hold. Neither of us slept much that night. And neither of us could have guessed just how much closer that shadow was about to get, or how far we'd both have to go to finally put it behind us for good that he came on a Saturday night, exactly 1 week after the text message. Claire and I were leaving a small restaurant near her apartment, still laughing about something unimportant, when a man stepped out from between 2 parked cars like he'd been standing there for hours, waiting. I recognized him before Claire even said a word. Not because I'd seen a photo, but because of the way her whole body changed the instant she saw him, the way her hand tightened around mine, the way her breath caught in her throat. Claire, he said, like her name was something he still owned. Go home, Marcus, she said. Her voice shook, but she didn't step back. He looked at me then, sizing me up the way men do when they're trying to decide if you're a threat or an obstacle. So this is him. The one who thinks he can just walk into my life and take what's mine. I'm not yours, Claire said, and something in her voice was different than I'd ever heard before. Not fear this time. Something closer to certainty. I was never yours. I was just too scared to say it to your face. He took a step closer. I moved slightly in front of her, not as a threat, just as a simple fact, I wasn't going anywhere. You don't know her, Marcus said to me, a bitter smile pulling at his mouth. You don't know who she really is. I know she's brave, I said. I know she got herself out of something that should have never happened to her in the first place. That's enough for me. For a moment, nobody moved. Rain that had been threatening all evening finally started to fall, the same way it had that very first night in the cafe, like the sky itself remembered. Then Marcus did something none of us expected. His shoulders dropped. The anger in his face cracked, and underneath it was something smaller, sadder, a man who had built his whole identity around controlling someone else, and had nothing left now that she was gone. I just wanted things back the way they were, he said quietly. They can't go back, Claire said. Her voice was gentle now, not because she owed him gentleness, but because she was finally strong enough to give it without losing herself. I'm not the person you left behind. I'm someone new. And I like her a lot more. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the rain, and this time, he didn't look back. We stood there together, soaked through, saying nothing for what felt like a long time. Then Claire started laughing, a shaky, disbelieving laugh, the kind that comes right after real fear finally lets go of you. I didn't think it would be that simple, she said. It wasn't simple, I told her, pulling her into me. It took you leaving him. It took you surviving on your own. It took you trusting yourself again. Tonight was just the last step. She rested her head against my chest, and I felt her breathing slow down, steady out, like something inside her had finally been allowed to rest. Months passed after that night. Claire picked her father's old camera back up, dusted it off, and started photographing strangers again, a woman feeding pigeons in the park, an old man reading a newspaper on the same bench every morning, 2 kids racing bicycles down a quiet street. She sold 3 of her photographs to a small local gallery that spring. It wasn't a fortune. It didn't need to be. It was hers. I finally opened that design studio I'd let myself forget about for years. It started small, just 2 rooms above a coffee shop, but it was mine in a way Cold Dynamics had never quite been. Claire hung one of her photographs on the wall by the door, the very first thing anyone saw when they walked in. One evening, almost a year after the night we met, We stood outside her apartment, the same small apartment with the lock only she held the key to, and she turned to me with a small box in her hands. "Do you remember the first night?" she asked. "How could I forget?" I said. "You scared 10 years off my life." She laughed, the easy, unguarded laugh I'd grown to love more than almost anything else in the world. Then her expression softened into something more serious. "That night changed everything," she said. "You changed everything," I told her. She shook her head. "You helped me when you didn't know me. You didn't have to. Most people would have called the police, or told me to get out, or just walked away and never thought about it again. I just did what anyone should do," I said. "No," she said softly. "Most people wouldn't have. I was so sure that night that nobody in the world cared what happened to me. And then you opened that car door instead of walking away. And somehow, you made me believe my life wasn't over. That it was actually just starting." I took her hand, feeling the same steadiness I'd felt every single day since that rainy night in the cafe. "It wasn't over. It was never over. You just needed someone to remind you of that. And you needed someone too," she said, looking up at me. "You were so busy being safe that you forgot how to actually live. I didn't just find someone who saved me that night. I found someone who needed saving just as much as I did." She was right, and I let myself admit it fully for the first time. Before Claire, I had built a life out of careful decisions and calculated risks, avoiding anything that might make me vulnerable, anything that might cost me something if it went wrong. I had mistaken that kind of safety for happiness for so long that I'd almost forgotten the difference. She had taught me that real life doesn't happen inside the walls we build to protect ourselves. It happens in the moments we're brave enough to open the door anyway, even when we don't know who or what is waiting on the other side. If you're going through something hard right now, something that feels like it might never get better, I hope this story reminds you of something simple: you are not required to stay somewhere that makes you smaller. You are allowed to run. You are allowed to ask for help. And sometimes, the bravest thing you will ever do is climb into the back seat of a stranger's car in the middle of the night, simply because you refuse to give up on yourself. Claire didn't just survive that night. She rebuilt her entire life from it, one small, brave choice at a time. And I didn't just help a stranger that night. I found the person who would spend the rest of her life helping me remember who I was always meant to be.